Well, this has been a very long time coming, and I'm sure that most of us had given up hoping that the original cast of Ghostbusters would ever get together again. After all, it's been 32 years since Ghostbusters 2 came out in cinemas. I for one was not expecting much from this movie and the vaunted return of the original cast. And the reason for this was the trailers. They clearly showed this was a movie about a bunch of kids that find a load of old Ghostbusters equipment apparently abandoned at an old farm. It didn't have any kind of fanfare for the return of the real Ghostbusters. And there's a good reason for that. But before I get started, please consider subscribing as that would really help me out. And if you like this content, give it a like. The original Ghostbusters was a work of genius. It was carefully balanced, beautifully made, and did everything right. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel like anything didn't make sense. You could almost believe that ghosts were a real thing, and there really were 4 guys out there taking down naughty poltergeists with nuclear accelerators strapped to their backs. In short, it was one of those rare things, an almost perfect movie. A movie that no matter how many times you watch it, no matter how often it comes on TV, and it has been on TV a lot in the last 30-something years, it never gets old. It never has you wanting to flick over onto something else. It never makes you think, oh god, not this again. Sadly, the sequel didn't quite live up to its illustrious progenitor, but it is still well loved, and it's still head and shoulders above the travesty that came next. I went to the cinema with my expectations held well and truly in check, and you know what? I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't disappointed either. This movie was pretty enjoyable, unlike the 2016 remake, which was an utter disaster from conception to finished product. But then, anything built specifically on an unpopular ideology is going to fail. Ghostbusters Afterlife sees a single mother and her 2 kids move to an old farm in the middle of nowhere when it is left to her after her father passes away. Little does she know, and this seems so bizarre as to be a gaping hole in the story, is that her father was Egon Spengler. Yes, Egon Spengler. Don't ask me how she doesn't know. Sadly, Egon dies in this movie, which since the original actor Harold Ramis has been dead for 7 years, was an unfortunate necessity. Anyway, that aside, somehow the original Ghostbusters have been forgotten, except for clips from the internet and I assume a Wikipedia page pointing out how they created some form of mass delusion in New York in the 80s. Looks like Walter Peck got the last laugh after all. The single mother, whose name is Callie, is struggling to get back on her feet after losing everything, and being left the farm in her father's will turns out to be a godsend for her. But life isn't about to get any easier for her because, as is to be expected from a Ghostbusters movie, things are going to get a bit weird. Her daughter Phoebe turns out to be very smart, which means she has a bit of a connection with Egon and finds his old ghost-busting equipment in his lab on the farm. At her new school, she meets a kid named Podcast, who is into conspiracy theories and the like, and who runs his own related, podcast. They become good friends, and he helps her figure out who her grandfather was. Callie also has a son, Trevor, who when he is not being geeky on Stranger Things, is essentially being, well, whatever he is, since his part in this movie is actually just older brother to Phoebe. Though he does find Ecto-1 in a shed and get it going again, so there's that. They meet schoolteacher Mr. Gruberson on their first day in the local school, and he takes an interest in Callie, since from what I could tell she's the only adult female in the town, so his options had been pretty limited until her arrival. He turns out to be a science geek too, and is also a massive Ghostbusters fan. And now that we have all the important characters, and Trevor, we can get on to the actual story, which is just a retelling of the original Ghostbusters movie, but without all the innovation and wacky fun, and the feeling of something major being at stake that the original cast actually gave us. That's not to say that what we get is bad. It isn't even close to bad, by Hollywood standards, but what it absolutely is not is original. There is not one single original moment in the movie. And that may be what the studio was going for after the debacle that was Ghostbusters 2016. They must have wanted an extremely safe movie that didn't attempt to do anything except retell the same story for a new generation, but keep enough fan service there to attract the fans of the original. And it has fan service galore, which is the real draw of this movie. You have Ecto-1, Ray's goggles, the Ghostbuster overalls, Ghost Traps, Ivor Shandor, the list goes on. They even use all the original music, which was such a nice treat and had me smiling from ear to ear. The movie plays like a hybrid of the Goonies and Ghostbusters, which sounds like it would be a mess, and it is, a bit, but it works, and it's entertaining, and at no point did I find myself wishing I'd done something else like unclog the sink or scrub the toilet, which have been far more interesting prospects than most of what comes out of Hollywood these days. A lot of you are going to wonder if this movie is anything like as woke as the previous one, and I'm happy to say that no, it isn't. It has some very woke aspects, as you would expect in this day and age, but they're not in your face and they do not ruin the experience, so it is easier to give them a pass. The actors for the most part do a great job. Paul Rudd is as amusing as ever, and almost always a plus point for a movie. Carrie Coon, as the mother Callie, is pretty good. I liked her character. She's no Sigourney Weaver, but then who is? McKenna Grace plays super smart Phoebe, and while I didn't find her hugely convincing, I thought she did a good enough job that I didn't have any major complaints. Logan Kim as Podcast was one of my favourite characters. He had lots of charisma, and I'm really hoping to see him in another Goonie-like movie because I think he could be really great given a bit more screen time. It's hard to believe that this is his first movie role. Then of course, there's Trevor and his random forced girlfriend, who don't really seem to add anything to the movie, and who I found to be essentially just space filler and an attempt to attract the Stranger Things crowd and get them to spend their money. The original cast was great, even if Bill Murray did phone it in a bit. It has been far too long since we last saw them together, and hearing them banter and be silly with each other again was such a great moment, a moment that fans were forced to wait far too long to enjoy. And great as it was, it will forever be a shame and a stain on the franchise that they couldn't get it together when Harold Ramis was still alive. Unfortunately, they were in the film for far too short amount of time, but you gotta be grateful for what you can get these days. I've heard a lot of complaints, mostly by people who are salty about the failure of the all-female reboot, about how there's too much fan service in this movie. And you know what? They are wrong.
Wrong, 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 wrong.
Wrong, they're wrong. When you make something for the fan service is the most important aspect. Because otherwise, why the hell would they turn up? Jason Reitman did his father and the fans proud with this movie. No, it isn't perfect. And yes, it is a slightly hollow rehash of the original, but it is absolutely a Ghostbusters movie. And it does something that Hollywood has forgotten in recent years. It cares for the fans. It doesn't spit in their face and say, enjoy it or else, bigot. There's even a moment near the end that hinted, even if it was just in my own mind, that just maybe we might get a sequel where the original, real Ghostbusters will get their own sequel without the kids who, while great in their own way, are just a distraction from what should be a more made-for-adults movie, like the original. Yes, there are aspects of this movie that make no sense, and they did annoy me a bit, but not so much that they ruined my enjoyment of what is a thoughtfully and respectfully made film. And the touching moment with Egon Spengler, that was nice to see. I can thoroughly recommend this movie. Just don't go expecting something on the level of the originals, because this is not up there. But it's a nice little diversion into what we've been missing all these years. This has been Movie Suck, reaffirming yet again that the 80s was a great decade for movies. And there may be just a little hope for the future of Hollywood. Just maybe. Signing out. Leave a like, share and subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side. No, who am I kidding? Hollywood is doomed.